Hi, Dr. Shahri. Welcome to another episode of my YouTube series.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course, our pleasure. I know that we had another series with each other, like we talked about something else, but for this episode, could you please introduce yourself and tell us about your professional background?
I'm Matsa Shahri. I'm an assistant professor of applied linguistics at San Diego State University, and I've been involved with linguistics, education, language instruction for the last 18 years or so.
Thank you so much. So today we are going to talk about academic writing, which I know
Mm.
that for you, that's something that you seem, interested in. And also, I think this is something that we don't get a lot of information around in our trainings. So our conversation is not specifically marriage and family or couples and family therapy field, but I think that it would be like more broader than that. But of course, like people who are interested in marriage and family therapy, they can benefit from the conversation. For the start, could you please tell us the difference between academic writing and general writing?
Well, I mean, writing in general and academic writing, there is a common foundation that involves facility with texts, using sources to construct arguments, to get things done in writing. I think that this is true of both of them, but I think general writing is a bit of a misnomer. There's no such thing as general writing. It's always writing in a particular domain, a particular area of knowledge. Um, so usually when we say general writing, it's because we are generalizing um, um, skill in writing across different domains.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to academic writing, it's writing in a particular area of expertise. So, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
if your viewers might be interested in marriage and family therapy, that's writing in marriage and family therapy, in the context of
Mm-hmm.
marriage and family therapy. And the most important difference is that with academic writing, there's a genre concern. There's a genre that one always writes in. So you're always writing something in a particular way. It's a particular genre of writing. You don't
Mm-hmm.
just write in general.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Thank you.
sorry, one last thing. So
Sure.
many of your viewers might be interested in writing research articles
Mm-hmm.
and then submitting them to journals in marriage and family therapy. So the research article is a genre.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is interesting. And I know that you have all this, expertise in that genre area. At the same time, I'm thinking like while you're talking about this, I'm thinking maybe some of the new generations when they watch this, like then they're comparing like academic writing, I don't know. Is it different from Instagram captions that we
Yes.
write, right? Is that
Okay.
is that a genre
Yeah,
itself?
yeah, yes. I mean, I writing on Instagram like the captions
Mm-hmm.
coupled to pictures. That's a genre in and of itself.
Oh, that's
Now,
interesting.
yes, and then to your last question about the difference between general writing in
Mm,
general and academic writing always involves technical knowledge, knowledge of a
mm,
specific domain. So, for instance, if you're writing a research article, the genre being a research article, you need to have knowledge. You need to have done the work, the process of conducting a study and having arrived at findings that you then want to present to your community, the community of fellow researchers or general audience who are interested in your findings. So there's
mm,
always there's technical knowledge makes it different, for instance, from writing on Instagram, right,
mm,
or writing on Facebook or on Twitter, for that matter.
mm-hmm.
And speaking of genres, so for instance, writing on Twitter, a Twitter post is the Twitter posts are one genre,
Mm.
right? And so different from Instagram posts or Instagram captions.
So it seems like
Uh,
we have unlimited genres.
yes, yes. I mean, it's human activity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's no limit to um, how many different genres we can have. The different genres emerging almost every year, right?
Yeah.
Especially enabled by technology,
Yeah.
digital technologies.
Mm-hmm. I can only imagine that. Thank you. Thank you for explaining the difference. I think now it's more clear for me. So speaking of, all these different things, and let's, address the elephant in the room. And this question is very biased by my lived experience. Working with the students, having colleagues, all these different things. But why is academic writing scary to many people?
Um, I think it's partly because most people who are about to start writing in an academic setting, you have had very little instruction.
Hmm.
They haven't really been taught explicitly how to do academic writing. It's always been part of they've always been expected to be able to write
Mm-hmm.
without being taught how to write.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I don't think it's exclusive to academic writing. Take any other domain, any other human activity. If you haven't been taught what to do, and you're expected to learn only from observation,
Hmm.
I think people are likely to feel insecure.
Yeah, so it's unfamiliar for them.
Yes, yes,
And not only it's unfamiliar, but at the same time, you just mentioned that there's this expectation
yes,
that you know how to write, right? And then
exactly.
that sentence itself makes me think about some of the myths that we have about, around academic
Yes,
writing, right?
yes,
Some of the beliefs that we have around academic writings that are not
yeah,
necessarily correct all the time, right?
yeah,
And one of them, I think, like I'm sure that you can talk about them
yeah,
very well, but one of them again has to do with this thing that because you know about something or you have
yes,
knowledge
exactly,
about something, then you should be able to write about it because
exactly.
it's just, it's like kind of like when you convert a file, I don't know, PDF file to
Yes,
Word, like something like that. But
right.
of course, that the process is much more complicated. So could you please tell us about
Yeah.
that, some of the myths?
Thanks for bringing that up, and I think it goes to the point you just made. The question, your last question. I think an important myth, I
Mhm.
think perpetuated by our educational system, and I think a belief held by many professors in different fields, is that if you come to a point where you have sufficient knowledge of the field, then you're expected to be able to write well about it. But that's far from that's far from the truth, because as books written, like books written by experts that are not well written, you know, that
Yes.
are, yes, that so that's one, so that's experts in the field, let alone students. If you're a student and you're like a graduate student, I think a lot of so some of your viewers are students learning to write or about to start an academic project. If you're a student and you've been studying a particular marriage and family therapy, for instance, or any other field for that matter, then after a period of time you might be expected to write. And so the myth is, you know it, you should be able to write.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's myth number one. Now, a second myth that comes to mind is the equation between academic writing and knowledge of language. So,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're a second language speaker, writer of English, you might think that to be able to write academically, it suffices to know the language well.
Mm-hmm.
But they're very different. I mean, it's certainly knowledge of the second language is the foundation. Knowledge of English is the foundation, but it's not enough at all. It's
Yeah.
much more involved in writing academically
Mm-hmm.
than, knowledge of grammar, for instance,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or words for that matter. It's
Yeah.
a, it's a completely different activity. That,
Yeah.
that, that's the reason why I said um, that's the reason why my students needs to be get instruction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I think right there, what you're saying, there's also because of that myth and that belief, sometimes we experience discrimination in the system
Yeah,
because if someone, speaks English as a second language, and just we're talking about English this here, for the different reasons that we have, but like let's say if they speak English as a
yes,
second language, the bias for
yeah,
mentors and professors is that
yeah,
this person is like their writing is horrible
yes,
because they don't have that knowledge, right? And the assumption again is this other person who speaks English as a first language, their writing is going to be better,
yes,
which in reality we know that sometimes that is not true at all, right? So can you tell us more about that?
yes. I can see discrimination happening here from two directions. One is if you're a first language speaker, like your first language is English, then you're expected to be able to write well
Mm-hmm.
academically.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not true, especially if you haven't got an instruction in writing. So that's one. But then one way this bias manifests in relation to second language writers, if your English is your second language, is that because you're not given an instruction, you're at a disadvantage,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes if you're a first language, your English is your first language, you might be able to, through observation, through reading a great deal, you might be able to kind of catch up, right, and sort of bridge the gaps left by the formal system of education and your writing skills. So you might be able to sort of come to a point where you can write academically somewhat well, but the journey is harder for a person who doesn't speak English as a first language, who speaks English as a second language. So that's another way, another direction in which this discrimination affects students.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that systemic perspective. I have another question, but just before I go there, is there any other myth that you want to talk about academic writing?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to, I don't know if you have time, I wanted to elaborate on this belief that academic writing or writing is simply a question of knowing a language, especially for
Mm-hmm.
a lot of students to assume that if they learn English well, then they'll be able to write well.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true. Because as I said, writing is a different activity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, very different from speaking. I mean, you learn speaking English, for instance, is spontaneous activities. It's a question of marshaling your thoughts at the moment, all right? And speaking fluency matters, but when it comes to writing, it's a great deal of planning, right, that
Mm-hmm.
goes into it, and you have to use sources,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's not you have to find the balance between your sources and the voice you want to project. It's always a question of working with these constraints,
Mm-hmm.
right, to express yourself in writing. So a very different activity from speaking. So again, I want to emphasize that an important myth here, an important mistaken belief that holds a lot of students back is learning English is on a par with writing in English
Mm-hmm.
or writing, especially academically. And I can go into more detail about academic writing. I know you have a set of questions you want to ask me, and it might be something that comes up
We have
later.
all the time in the world, so please
Um, yeah,
take your yeah.
there's a lot to be said about academic writing. You asked me about academic writing and writing in general.
Mm,
As I said, I think it's a question you sent me your questions before,
mm,
so I know that it's one of your next questions. So
uh,
I'll
okay.
wait until then.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. But yeah, all of the things that you mentioned, they are making, a lot of sense. So one of the challenges that I've noticed in graduate schools, like again, like something that I experienced with my classmates, cohorts, mentors, professors, is that sometimes, as you mentioned, there's this assumption that because you are a graduate student, especially if you're a PhD student, right?
Yeah,
You are a PhD student, you came so far, so you should know. You should
mm,
know academic writing and you should be able to do all these different things while in reality students they did not have any sort of academic training for
yes,
academic writing, and this is not just about international students because
yeah,
I know it can be a different category. Sometimes we're talking about different cultures, different educational system, even like in this same system, because again, like I've noticed that in my experience that for domestic students, right, for students, American students, like they are PhD students right now, but like never ever they
yeah,
had that training, and there's that assumption. So what do you think about that? I think that's a really it can be a really barrier
yes,
because there's this expectation here, and then you didn't have that training, and then
yes.
people they do not want to meet each other like where they are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a gap left by our educational systems.
Hmm.
You know, writing, like you said, again, it goes back. It has to do with the beliefs we talked about, the myth. One important myth around academic writing that if you know a particular domain, then you're able to write it. So it's taken for granted that writing will take care of itself. It's
Hmm.
just something, it's a skill that will sort itself out in
Hmm.
the course of time as you read more and more. But it's not necessarily true. And I know that there are some people who are able to learn to write well
Hmm.
despite a lack of education in that regard, but most people can't. So
Hmm.
yes, it's a gap. I think it has a lot to do with the architecture of our educational system.
Hmm.
There are no, I know there are writing classes. Most of the times, these writing classes are intended for undergraduate students
Hmm. Hmm.
because, and I think it's part of it because of the complexity of graduate writing. Like if you're a graduate student writer, you need your writing is very disciplinary in nature. It's always you need to learn to write. You need to get instruction in a particular field,
Yeah. Hmm.
and it's very difficult if you're a writing program on a university campus to cater to different disciplines, to different fields.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it has all these different layers, right? So just go
Yeah,
ahead.
exactly.
Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And then leaving us within a situation where there is writing support for undergrad students, but very little writing support that is discipline specific, that is
Hmm.
field specific for
Hmm.
grad students. And
Hmm.
then a lot of grad students are kind of are um shortchanged by the system.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that speaking of this specific matter and issue, I think sometimes the educational system fails us, or set up our failure for us in some words, because hear me out. So first of all, there's that expectation thing that we already talked about. There's this
Right.
expectation, but you didn't have the training. And then add to that you mentioned that academic writing is an activity, right?
Yeah.
So I would just say like it's an
Definitely.
intentional
Yeah, exactly.
activity, right? So you need to be very intentional, very mindful of what you're doing, the process, what you're learning. And I think that again, like this is not science, this is just my experience. But some of the things, sometimes what I experience is it's ironic because it's the opposite. Like sometimes international students who speak English as a second language, because they believe, because of all those different
Mm.
beliefs, right? Mistaken beliefs that, oh, my English is not good, or whatever. So I'm going to do this task, which is out of my comfort. So they are very intentional about what they're doing. They're double check and triple. They check their writing multiple
Mm.
times. They ask for help. They use different resources. They read it out loud. All these different things. And sometimes people who speak English as a first language, they don't do that, right?
Yes.
Because there's this belief that my English is good. This is my language, so I'm just going to write it down. And then they do not check it. They do not like ask for help. And then at the end of the day, we end up with we see the difference, right,
Yeah.
in the result. And there's this other part about our educational system that again, like it's my experience that sometimes, so in most universities we have writing center, right?
Yes.
Writing centers, and with respect to all writing centers and people who work there, but I think that there's this gap there that you as a student, you reach out to them, and sometimes the help that you get is with, I don't know what you call it, like in your field or expertise, but like it's with grammar and
Yeah. It,
so
it,
it's not about
yes.
like you don't learn, or the feedback that you need to get, it doesn't get addressed. And then at the same time,
Yeah.
so there's this whole chaos, right? Because then you take your writing to your professor and they're like, what kind of a write, like this is not good, and then you tell them that you ask for help before you went to
Yes.
writing. So
Yeah.
you see what I'm saying? So there's this
Yeah.
whole chaos in the system that we need to address from my perspective. What do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's nothing there that I disagree with. I think university writing centers are sometimes ill prepared
Mm-hmm.
for the kinds of tasks they're called on to do. Like if you're a grad student and you have you to take your text to a university writing center, they don't have disciplinary knowledge. They don't necessarily understand your field
Mm-hmm.
and the genre that you're writing in. So, for example, if you're writing a review article, for instance, a book review, for example,
Mm-hmm.
3-page book review, the people working in a writing center, as skilled as they are in writing,
Mm-hmm.
they may not be familiar with the genre of book reviews or research
Mm-hmm.
articles for that matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The kind of help you're likely to get is not discipline specific. It's very general, like you said. It might have to do with grammar. They might help you edit the text, but because they lack technical knowledge of content area, like they don't understand your psychology, right, or
Mm-hmm.
a marriage and family therapy, then they can't help you past a certain point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You
I
you
see.
you are right. Yes.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So speaking of all these different things and asking for help, what are some of the common good practices in academic writing? What does research tell us
Mm.
in that area?
Thank you for asking good question. I mean,
You were
I think
waiting for
it's
that. Just
yes,
kidding.
yes. This was like a few minutes ago. I was when you asked the question, I was thinking about how the process of
Mm-hmm.
going about writing something academic.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of good practices graduate students have to cultivate.
Mm-hmm.
One is you have to get yourself familiarized with the genre you want to write. Like if first you need to understand that every text, everything you write belongs to a particular genre. So you got to figure out what it is. Am I writing a research article? People, I mean, everybody knows what it is. They don't think about it as consciously as we want
Mm-hmm.
them to. So if you know
Yeah.
you're writing a research article, then you have to find, and then first make sure you understand what it is you're writing. Second, um, um, look at some examples of the genre, research articles, and try to figure out um, how that text is written, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are the features, the genre, the features of that particular genre? For instance, there's been a lot of research in linguistics into how uh, research article introductions are written,
Mm-hmm.
right? We know that there are three different moves, rhetorical moves that John Swells came up with years ago, around 3 decades ago. So you have to think about it and understand the genre. I think the best, most effective way of doing that would be by gathering examples and getting yourself familiarizing yourself with how these different examples are written,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a question of figuring out how to express yourself or your voice, how to do what you want to do through the conventions of that genre. Because you
Mm-hmm.
have to, because there's certain conventions, certain expectations, genre expectations that you have to abide by.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not enough, because you also have content knowledge. There's some research findings you want to convey. These are things that come from your experience, things that come from your lab, come from your research. You need to figure out how to plug those research findings into the structure of the genre. And
Mm-hmm.
the structure of the genre is revealed by looking at examples.
Mm-hmm.
But knowledge of content, research findings, and everything, that's your experience. So it's a question of finding how to combine the two.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's always just to sum up. For me, I think the best, a very good habit would be to start off by finding examples.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to write a book review, find book reviews. If you want to write research article, find research articles in your particular, and I can't emphasize this enough, in your particular area. So if family, if it's marriage and family therapy, you got to find papers and read marriage and family therapy. Read them 4, 5, 1. See how the introductions are written, how the paragraphs are arranged, what kind of rhetorical moves are made, what are the things that writers do in the first paragraph, second paragraph, third paragraph, and decide sometimes even you can there's certain language structures you can use, like you can borrow from these examples to use in your own. But you have to be very careful there. You have to be very cautious as to how you use or how you borrow structures from other texts to
Mm-hmm.
use in your own.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. And as you were talking, I was thinking like when we are talking about a specifically research article, as you mentioned, genre, it's even like more complicated because not only
Yeah,
we're talking about the academic writing, but also you need to have a good grasp and knowledge of
exactly.
research and
Yes.
research design, all those different things as well, right? So why are
Yes.
you doing this research, right? And then
Yes.
what is the contribution and
Yes.
all these different things. But just here, like we're going to keep talking about academic writing. About academic writing, I think what you mentioned, so what I've heard is you need to basically read to write, right? You need to have
Exactly.
that sample
Yes.
structure in front of yourself.
Yes.
And
Exactly. Yeah. That's
however you want to do it. Yeah. Okay, go
Yeah,
ahead.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Even things that you were talking about content, like you need to understand your own research, what your findings are, kind of have enough clarity about your own ideas, your own research findings
Mm-hmm.
that you want to put in your research article. Even those issues.
Mm-hmm.
If you read articles, if you're interested in that genre, you see how they're expressing, how they're conveying their research findings, or how they're conveying their research gap in the introduction.
Mm-hmm.
You can then again, that kind of reading these articles will help you will help you understand what you need, the steps you need to take,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not
Mm-hmm.
only in terms, not only sort of language wise, but also in terms of content. What
Mm-hmm.
content you need to be clear about.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I want to add like my own experience with good practices. But before that, is there any other common good practices that you want to talk about?
Yes, I also wanted to add that it's you should seek feedback from others.
Mm,
It's
yes.
writing is a collaborative, especially academic writing is a collaborative endeavor. You have to, once you're done writing, you should seek as much feedback as you can. Have people read your article, or if it's another genre, have them read your text. Have more than one person make comments, And another closely linked to this is read your article on different days. Because if you read your article today, you might think, because everything is so fresh in your mind, you might you might think that everything is, that your writing is clear enough. But if you read it on there like 3 days, postpone reading it for 3 days and read it then it might, other issues might jump out at you. Right? And it's like you're kind of lending yourself another pair of eyes.
Yes.
Right. You're kind of multiplying yourself and sort of, and reading it from the perspective of a person who does not know, who's not as familiar with your text. If you read your text 3 days later, and try to do that as much as possible, get feedback from other people, as many people as you can, especially people who have disciplinary knowledge, right? Knowledge of your field, and then try to
And
engage with their
hopefully they give
comments
you good
meaningfully.
feedback. Sorry.
Yeah, yes.
Sorry.
That's another issue, yes.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's like I said, that's another issue. But then it's a question of engaging with their feedback meaningfully.
Exactly. And I know that we can talk about feedback for another episode itself, but you mentioned great things. So I just wanted to add, and some of them you already talked about them, but to add my own experience, because especially like in our fields, you know that it involves a lot of writing, right? In each class you have, some projects, you have final papers, you have like all these different things. So I remember like in my training, we didn't have a like course specifically about writing, but like we had some courses that like theories, stuff like that. We talked about writing there. And so we read different books about writing, and there are different books out there, right? That they're going like to teach you or help you with your academic writing. And so you know me well, and you know that I'm a very organized person. But some of the parts or feedback or piece of advice in these books that were so helpful for, I've seen that for my cohort, for my classmates, that were like, yes, this is helpful. It was not as helpful for me because I'm already organized, but like it's like this simple practice that blocks some time and sit down and write. You need to write in order to see what kind of feedback you need. And the piece of feedback that I got from one of my mentors, Dr. Hertlein, that was super helpful for me. Like she told me once, like if you have 100 pages of writing in your head compared to if you have 2 pages of writing on paper, even if that two pages like on paper, if they are like garbage, that is what we need, because we can do something with it when it's on paper. Like we cannot do anything with it when it's in your head. And I think that is something that I've noticed a lot with the students because of that unfamiliarity, because it's unfamiliar, because it's scary, because it's uncomfortable, because all these different reasons, they keep postponing actually sitting down and actually writing. And then that is not helpful. You need, like, even if it's garbage, you need to sit down and you need to write.
I could not agree more with that piece of advice. You gotta bring yourself, sit down, start writing, even if you end up writing things that you'll finally have to get rid of because they're not worth anything, which is an unlikely scenario. But the forcing yourself to get things on paper or start typing things is an essential step. You got to do that first before you have anything. I mean, you won't be able to revise what's not written.
Exactly.
That's something you can't get around.
Exactly. And again, I know it's uncomfortable, whatever for some people, but you need to do that. So that was one piece of advice that was very helpful for me. The other thing, because speaking of like that academic writing and training, people assume that these things, but I didn't know. So one of the things that was so helpful for me, and I always tell that to my students, is the advice that I got from Dr. Angela Lamson. And once she told us that when you write something, just look at your writing as GPS, right? So when you have this address on GPS, like GPS is telling you, turn left after this, and turn right. So with each step, where you're going. You won't get surprised by the next like kind of like instruction. Yes, or read, yeah. So and then she said, like, your writing should be like this. When I read your paper, I should not be surprised when I read a paragraph, because in the previous paragraph, like there was no kind of like GPS for that. I think that makes that made it so tangible and like
Yeah.
clear for me when I heard that, and I was like,
Yes.
this make because we always talk about, oh, you need to have smooth transition and stuff like that, and that is helpful, but at the same time, just that kind of like piece of advice, it made it very clear for me. And
Mhm.
I always tell my students, like, when you read your own paper, it should be like GPS, and you should know where
Yeah.
you're going. The reader should know where they are going, right?
Yeah, exactly. I would say you ensure your text is reader friendly. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, a couple of minutes ago, I suggested postponing rereading your text for a
Mm-hmm.
couple of days, because when you go back with a fresh pair of eyes, it's as if somebody else is reading your text. So make sure your writing is, it's like is friendly
Mm-hmm.
to readers, so your readers can find their way. You got the right transition words put in, and you kind of guide them well through the text.
Exactly. I think that's as you mentioned, that makes a lot of sense, and that is so helpful. And I think the two other things that have been very helpful for me. The first one is, as you mentioned, like read it, read your paper later. The only thing that I would add to that, from my experience, is read it out loud, right? Do
Yes.
not read it like in your head. For some reasons, and I think one of them is because it's easy to get distracted when you're just reading something like silently, like, right? So, but when you read it out loud, there's more chance that you catch the errors, or you
Yes.
see that, oh, actually this doesn't make sense, or this doesn't go with that, or you see that GPS that we're
Yes.
talking about. And the last thing is, again, like you mentioned, this the collaboration. Oh my God, when I realized that about writing,
Mhm.
that and I think that you were the first person who introduced that idea to me, and then I read books about it, and I experienced it myself. But when I realized that writing is a collaborative skill, so like you don't need to feel like there's this mountain in front of me that I need to move, because that just seems very heavy and impossible, right?
Yeah.
If you feel like this is something, and actually, like in our field, I know that it's not the same thing in all the fields, but in our field, like even when you have a published article, when there are more than one author's
Mhm.
name on the article, it's more valuable because it shows like it's more than one brain, right? So you had that collaboration when you are working on that project. So again, like be resourceful and ask for help and work on that collaboration, because you're not going to figure out everything just by yourself, and you always have blind spots, and there are things that you need just fresh eyes to look at.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, research science is a collaborative
Hmm.
endeavor.
Hmm.
It always involves other people, and so is writing. You have to have other people look at your writing. You not only that, but also some collaborative writing could be even more than that. It could be you contributing part of a text,
Hmm.
and your co-authors contributing another part of the text,
Hmm.
and working together to make sure your writing is clear enough and you're conveying your ideas
Hmm.
fully, right, and as clearly as possible.
Exactly. Thank you. So what can mentors do to help students with academic writing?
Um, I think they could, uh, well, they could. What I would do to if well, when I'm mentoring grad students, is I would look around, see if I can find any courses focus on graduate writing. If there are any, I'll certainly direct my students to do
Hmm.
the courses on graduate writing. That would be the first thing. Secondly, I'll be a little more patient with
Hmm.
my students. When you read their text, try to be specific in the feedback you give them.
Hmm.
Make sure your feedback is not vague and broad.
Hmm.
Right? And in addition to that, you should um, give them examples of good text. Sometimes you might have to insert your own a paragraph of your own and sort of model the kind of writing you want them to do.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Exactly. Kind of like helping them with the instruction and teaching them. Yeah, that are so helpful. And I would say, like, just about the feedback, give them constructive feedback, which is,
Sure.
again, like empowering them, not
Yes,
just, crushing their souls about writing,
that's true.
because I've seen that sometimes
Yes.
mentors, like, their feedback is just what you're writing is just horrible, or, whatever, right?
Yeah,
And
and
then that is not helpful. How can you make use of that, right?
yeah, you want to make sure you to find what's good about someone's writing, and also be very specific in terms of what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of and not be overly critical.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
only pointing out what's wrong, I'm not sure only pointing out what's wrong can be very useful.
Yeah.
We
Exactly.
got to be specific in terms of what they can do later.
Hmm.
And as you said, you don't want to come across too critical.
Yeah. And sometimes when I talk about these things, I get this comment or feedback that what you're saying is kind of like encouraging everyone to celebrate mistakes. And I'm not saying that we do not want to celebrate mistakes, but we can use, when we make mistakes, which all of us we do, right? But when we make mistakes, we can make those some opportunities that we can learn, right? Learning opportunities,
True that.
learning
Yeah.
moments. And I think that's a very different perspective that you made this mistake, it's just horrible, you're like this and that, with all those assumptions that we have, right? Without going and asking the student, oh, by the way, I know that you're a PhD student, but did you, happen to have any
Right.
academic writing training? Or is this something that you're
Right.
interested in, right? Having those
Yeah.
conversations instead of that, we just go and with our expectations, and if they don't
Yeah.
know how to do it, we're like, and then we need to be
That's
very
true.
mindful of that.
That's
So,
that's certainly true. Yes. Yes. That's
yeah.
certainly true. You want to you want to find out why they're why they're writing the way they do. Some might be something that comes from their educational experience in the past or lack thereof.
Hmm.
Like somebody and that's something you need to address rather than just pointing out what's wrong in a critical way.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And again, like this is my experience that I think that is another thing that can be helpful as the things that we do as mentors is for students. Of course, that everyone's journey is different, right? But we have some students at graduate level, PhD level, that they're in the PhD program and they haven't like published anything yet, right? And sometimes the idea of publishing something is just so
Mm,
scary and big for them. So in my experience, sometimes it's helpful to help them with small steps, right? So, and again, like in our like marriage and family therapy world, that a small step is
yes,
sometimes having a book review, right? It's just one or
right.
two pages. You usually do it with a mentor, a professor who is well known. So kind of like there's that collaboration there, and it's excuse me, and it's not too heavy, right? It's just 2 pages. And then once they do that and it's published, kind of like they see their names in prints and oh, there's that possibility added to their perspective. So then the next step is, okay, let's go and, work on this article or whatever. I think that sometimes, again, like as mentors, because of all those biases and assumptions,
Mm.
we start with these big, heavy weights, and then we are wondering why they cannot, move the weights. Does that make sense?
I fully agree with that. Like
Yeah.
starting off with a smaller project and then kind of helping your students work their way gradually, kind of easing into larger
Hmm.
projects like research article writing. I think that's a great idea. It's a
Thank
great avenue um, to mastery of more complex genres of academic writing.
Thank you. Thank you for confirming and approving my idea. But I know that I took a lot of your time, but as our last question, the question that I always ask my guests, what is one thing that you would tell the younger version of yourself, maybe when you were a graduate student, about specifically this writing part,
Uh,
becoming a writer, if you say? So, what would one thing that you would
mm.
tell the younger version of yourself?
I remember years ago when I first started writing, I was overly preoccupied with making sure all my sentences sounded good, and it had a paralyzing effect on me and my productivity because
Hmm.
I couldn't write anything. I want to make sure everything was perfect. Looking back, it was a mistake,
Hmm.
and it partly had to do with lack of training in academic writing. I was
Hmm.
self-taught, you know, and it was a habit. It was a state of it was a mindset that held me back,
Hmm.
and I would encourage people to free themselves from fixation or preoccupation with perfect sentences. Every single sentence needs to be good. That's, academic writing. In academic writing, you're trying to present your research ideas in a way that um, within certain conventions of genres. You do not need to make sure every sentence is perfect. You need to
Hmm.
be concerned about, you're concerned with reader understanding, and not try to, as I said, to free yourself from that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
That would be what I would say that to my younger self.
Take it easier, maybe.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
You summed up what I wanted to say.
that mindset of, because I'm familiar with that mindset of, perfectionism, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes I know that maybe in some situations it can be functional, but at the same time, sometimes it is very it's not helpful
True.
because even like if you do something like it doesn't help you to experience things in life in general, and in this topic that we're talking about, it doesn't help you with that experience that you can have as a writer,
Yes,
as a scientist, as a researcher.
it's an unrealistic expectation,
Mm-hmm.
right? That doesn't serve you well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's like I said, it's rooted in a mindset that is not an unhelpful mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So even like in terms of the conversations that we have with ourselves, like instead of telling yourself that I should write this article in 1 week, maybe you can change that
Yes,
narrative, challenge that, and then tell yourself that if, during this weekend, if I write, I don't know, 5 pages, that would be awesome. So
exactly,
there's a difference there between should or, this would be awesome.
exactly. And a lot of these beliefs, like I said, are not realistic, because
Mm-hmm.
if your expectation is that you can write an article in a week, you
Mm-hmm.
might be able to do so if you're very hard on yourself, push yourself very hard. But then the article you write in 1 week will not end up good quality. And you'll probably be rejected.
Yeah,
You have to put in a great deal of work later to to
exactly.
undo the damage.
Yeah. I had a professor who always said, like, there's a difference between can and should. And then
Yes.
she said, can you write your dissertation in 1 week? Probably you can. Should you do that? No, you should
No.
not. So we should ask
Yeah.
that question more of
True.
ourselves. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you so much, Dr. Shahri, for all your time. I know that you're super busy. We appreciate all this time and sharing your wisdom with us. And looking
Thank you very
forward
much
to our
for
future
having me.
conversation. Of course, our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You
Bye.
too. Bye.